video. Are you taking video?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm taking video. Are we going to see video of you later? Oh, somebody's here, Opie. There goes the camera. For anybody to try to get in there. Oh, fuck. I've never seen that line that dark and that black.
Mm-hmm.
Who was he?
Could be anybody.
I'm hoping you'll give me a name. He is greater. Hill. We're on a hill.
We're on a hill.
What? What's your name? Or maybe the first letter of your name.
We're on a hill.
Yep.
It just said hill.
It did say hill.
Snake Hill.
Snake Hill.
And where we find ourselves here is, as the name on the door would suggest, the surgery room. Most garrisons like this would have hopefully had some kind of medical professional, the problem being that there was no real accreditation system at the time. You would basically apprentice with someone who had a name and a reputation for 4 or 5 years, maybe more, at the end of which he would give you a note, which you could present to any potential employer saying that, I know everything this man taught me, which means you can trust me. In some cases, this was worth a little bit less than it would have been normally, but all of these surgeons, if they had the money to afford it, would have had the tools that we see laid out here. There's quite a number of tools here for quite a number of operations, and I'll go through a few of them. Obviously, some of the more gruesome ones. The main one that you would have found being performed in any battlefield situation were amputations. Amputations were rather simple and accomplished with the large sets of knives, saws, and other probing material that we see over here. First of all, if you were going to actually cut off someone's limb, you would not give them anything for the pain. There were no drugs of that sort at the time, and unfortunately, alcohol just makes the blood flow more freely, which would not have been very good. So instead, you would usually be given a wooden roller wrapped in leather, put between your teeth so that you would not bite off your own tongue, at which point they got to cutting. Now, the first knife you would use is called the capital knife. That's a rather large knife you can see here, crescent-shaped. This is because in a single, clean movement, you were meant to cut all the way around the limb that you were going to amputate all the way down to the bone. This is the quick and easy part, however, because next, because they need something to tie off at the end, they begin to peel the skin back from where they've cut. At that point, they start to cut their way down through the soft tissue towards the bone to create a conical shape going down towards where they'll cut it. At that point, they use what was basically a wood saw, something like this. Now, this one would be used for something like a finger or a wrist. The larger ones really would have been wood saws, rather large and rather effective. A standard surgeon of the time was expected to be able to amputate an arm or a leg in about 2 minutes 30 seconds, maybe 5 if they were going slowly. Speed was of the essence. After the night assault here at Fort Erie, there were so many wounded that Dunlop, Tiger Dunlop as he was known, the surgeon of the 41st Regiment, was cutting off limbs, doing amputations and other surgical work, he said, for 3 days straight without rest. And that was just him. So this was something where time was of the essence. You would start cutting through the bone. Again, there's nothing to take away the pain. And you wouldn't go all the way through. You wanted to save time. Instead, you would cut about 3/4 of the way through the bone and then, prepare yourselves, snap it off. At that point, you would toss it back out and you would start to dress the wound. You'd peel the skin back over, take some wadding, something like cotton, that would soak up the fluids, stuff it inside, and tie it off. At that point, you'd usually leave it for a day or so just to see how it was faring, at the end of which you'd open it back up to see if everything was being collected, that there wasn't anything inside that might be causing an infection, and if that was the case, you'd tie it back up finally and sear it, often with a red-hot pan. This man, the man who owned this very bed, was named Captain Nicholas Kingsley. He was a young officer in his 20s in the King's 8th Regiment of Foot, a rather auspicious appointment, a regiment that at this point could trace its history back to the 1670s. It had won many battle honors, and he had a very fruitful career ahead of him. However, when war broke out with the United States, he was stuck here in Canada. He probably would have preferred to be in Europe, where there were even more chances for promotion, but instead he stayed here in the Niagara, a boggy and swampy area with very little in the way of urban settlement. Unfortunately, this lended itself to a rather nasty local illness known as ague and fever. This was essentially a catch-all term for many different types of respiratory illnesses, but in his case, it flooded his lungs with mucus and fluids, particularly as he slept. It was chronic and debilitating. What it was not, however, in most cases, was lethal. If he'd been willing to wait out a year for this, the symptoms might have subsided and he might have simply been cured by time. The problem being, of course, that he came down with this in spring of 1813. This was a new campaigning season. The Americans had seized the initiative and captured Fort George at the other end of the river, and they took hold of it. Their plan was to push up to Hamilton, modern-day Toronto, as well as Kingston eventually. This couldn't be allowed to happen, so a large British force, including Kingsley and the King's 8th, were sent to besiege it. Because they were now in campaign and Kingsley was a captain, commander of 150 men, he needed his wits and his health about him. And unfortunately, the way he chose to deal with this debilitating illness was something that was even more debilitating: quicksilver treatment, or as you or I would know it, mercury. Now, if you don't know much about mercury, it's a nasty substance. They won't let you touch it anymore because it seeps through the skin. There's a good reason why they called people at the time, in some cases, mad hatters, because they would use mercury to treat the hats to give them a nice finished sheen, which unfortunately did nothing for your nervous system. Over time, months and months of taking regular doses of mercury, his system began to scream in pain. By the end, he himself said it felt like every part of his body was screaming in agony at once, as if every pain he'd ever experienced was coming to him in a single moment. Not exactly pleasant. And, of course, it eventually ended his life. One night, up near modern-day Hamilton, while he was recuperating in this very bed, he drowned in his sleep, the damage being so severe he could not wake himself in the middle of the night to clear his lungs. Now, thankfully, the bed was preserved. They were far away from the fighting, and it was quickly taken back to his family's estate in England, and they kindly donated the bed frame to us in 1941, just 2 years after we'd opened out of the blue. Unfortunately, however, he seems to have come with it. Kingsley did serve here before and during the war, as well as up at Fort George, and he had a bit of a reputation as a womanizer. To this reputation, we've had numerous women over the years report feeling fingers running through their hair, and a number of men, Kingsley being a very competitive man, feeling being shoved from hands that weren't there down the stairs.